At a convention in Dallas with 5,000 people packed, cameras rolling from every major network, on stage, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is thundering about America's broken justice system. The crowd roars in agreement, hungry for change. But suddenly, from the shadows, Michelle Obama steps forward. Uninvited, she demands just 1 minute to speak. But Jasmine orders security to throw her out. And in the next 60 seconds, the hall explodes into shouts, cheers, and chaos. Some yell, "Let her speak!" Others cry, "Get her out!" And what was supposed to be a peaceful forum on justice turns into a battle of pride, pain, and raw truth, leaving the entire room and the nation split right down the middle. Two black women, two visions for justice. One demands immediate action. The other believes we must talk, even when it hurts. And here's the question that could change how you see America. Can we fix injustice without tearing each other apart? Or is the fight itself the price of real change? Stay with me, because what Michelle said in just 1 minute left even her fiercest critics stunned and turned social media into a firestorm that's still burning today. Backstage at the K. Bailey Hutcherson Convention Center, the hum of the crowd seeped through thick black curtains, a low roar like distant surf pounding ashore. Under rows of bright vanity lights, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood fanning herself with a laminated copy of her speech, glancing over at her aide, Carla, who was fussing with Jasmine's hair for the 5th time in 15 minutes. "Girl, this Texas heat could curl steel," Jasmine muttered, rolling her eyes, her voice equal parts annoyance and mischief. Carla snorted, pinning a stray curl back into place. "Welcome to Dallas, where the hair's big, the temp's bigger, and the political egos are the biggest of all." Jasmine burst into laughter, then leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice. "Please, half these politicians are just here for the photo op. I'm half tempted to start my speech with, 'Y'all better buckle up, because I'm about to tell the truth.'" Carla clutched her clipboard to her chest, giggling so hard a bottle of hairspray rattled off the table. The mood was light, bright, and filled with the delicious tension of a woman about to step into the spotlight and own it. The moment Jasmine finally stepped onto the stage, the audience, a sea of more than 5,000 faces, erupted into deafening cheers. A wave of applause, swelling so loud it drowned out the first few words of her speech. Camera flashes flickered like strobe lights across the convention hall, and a CNN boom mic bobbed over the front rows as reporters leaned forward, eager for the next viral soundbite. Jasmine gripped the podium, beaming, her voice commanding, as she thundered into the microphone about America's broken justice system. "This system must be fair for everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the connected, but everyone," she declared, her words slicing through the noise like a blade. The audience roared back, clapping and whooping, some standing and whistling, swept up in her righteous fire. Jasmine flashed a quick grin and couldn't resist a little jab. "And don't worry, I'll try to finish before my hair melts off my scalp," she quipped, sending ripples of laughter through the crowd. Even the camera operators were caught smirking behind their lenses. But just as Jasmine found her rhythm, building toward her next crescendo, something shifted. A rustling in the shadows near the side of the stage drew the eye of several security guards, their earpieces crackling as they stiffened and angled their bodies protectively toward the podium. Jasmine, mid-sentence, caught the change in energy instantly, her lawyer instincts kicking in like muscle memory honed from years of courtroom showdowns. She paused, her gaze narrowing as she scanned the edge of the crowd, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. Murmurs rippled through the hall like wind across tall grass, as people turned their heads, cell phones already rising in the air, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Then, through the shadows, emerged a familiar figure, a woman whose presence seemed to carry both gravity and star power in equal measure. Michelle Obama, elegant in a crisp navy pantsuit, strode forward with a calm but unmistakable purpose. Her eyes sparkled under the harsh stage lights, and though she wore a polite smile, there was a glint of resolve beneath it, as if she'd made up her mind, and nothing, not even security or protocol, would stand in her way. Gasps spread across the audience, followed by a growing rumble of excited chatter. People whispered Michelle's name as though conjuring a ghost, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. It was as though the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees, only to surge again with electric tension. Jasmine gripped the podium a little tighter, her expression freezing into a mask of polite professionalism, though the faintest flicker of irritation danced behind her eyes. Carla, standing just off stage, clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white, mouthing, "Oh my God." Security guards moved in closer, forming a cautious half-circle as Michelle continued forward, her presence shifting the air around her, the audience buzzing like a beehive rattled by a sudden strike. A man in the second row, wearing a cowboy hat, muttered to his wife, "What in the hell is she doing here?" But before anyone could answer, Michelle stopped dead center in the aisle, lifted her chin, and fixed her gaze squarely on Jasmine, as if issuing a silent challenge before a courtroom cross-examination. In that single heartbeat, it became clear to every person in the room that this was no longer just Jasmine's speech. It was about to become a showdown. And no one, least of all Jasmine herself, knew exactly how far Michelle was willing to go to seize the mic, or how explosive the next 60 seconds were about to become. Michelle paused for just a fraction of a second in the aisle, soaking in the stunned silence that had rippled outward like a dropped pebble in a pond. Then, in a voice as smooth and confident as ever, she leaned slightly toward the microphone stand closest to the aisle, and, with a grin, quipped, "You know, I would have been here a lot sooner, but apparently, the city of Dallas believes in making folks drive in circles for 30 minutes just to find parking." A burst of laughter rolled through the crowd, the tension easing as though someone had cracked a window in a stuffy room. Even one of the security guards stifled a grin, eyes darting nervously between Jasmine and Michelle. A man in the back hollered, "Welcome to Texas, Michelle," to which she shot back playfully, "Honey, I've been welcomed 3 times already, by 3 different parking meters." The audience chuckled, some clapping lightly, grateful for the familiar warmth that radiated from Michelle like sunlight on a crisp morning. For a few brief moments, it was as if the entire hall had forgotten that she wasn't supposed to be there, that she'd stepped onto a stage uninvited, interrupting a major political event. Phones rose higher into the air, screens glowing as people scrambled to capture every second of this unexpected twist. A woman in the third row fanned herself rapidly, whispering to her friend, "She's still got it. Lord, that woman could charm a rattlesnake." The crowd's murmur became a gentle ripple of laughter and chatter, as if Michelle had single-handedly pulled everyone into the palm of her hand, turning shock into curiosity and suspicion into admiration. But the laughter hadn't yet died down when Jasmine's eyes, once bright with humor and charisma, darkened like clouds rolling over a summer sky. Her fingers tightened around the wooden podium, the playful spark gone, replaced by a cold precision honed through countless battles in courtrooms and on the House floor. She leaned into her own microphone, her voice suddenly razor-sharp and amplified over the PA system, slicing through the room like a blade. "Mrs. Obama," she said, each syllable crisp and deliberate, "you were not on the program today. Security, escort her out." The room fell so silent for a beat that you could hear the soft, mechanical whir of camera lenses adjusting focus, the air thick with the sudden vacuum of breath held in collective shock. And then, as though a dam had cracked, the convention hall exploded into chaos. Half the crowd shot to their feet, shouting over one another, their voices colliding in a cacophony of loyalty, confusion, and outrage. From one corner, a group of middle-aged women waved tiny handheld flags and shrieked, "Let her speak!" While closer to the stage, a cluster of Jasmine's supporters chanted, "Show respect, get her out!" A cowboy hat bobbed above the crowd as a man bellowed, "This is Texas, let the lady talk," while a woman beside him clasped her hands in prayer, her face pale, as if terrified that violence might break out at any second. Security guards hesitated, caught between training and the knowledge that physically removing Michelle Obama could ignite a political firestorm of epic proportions. Jasmine held her ground, chin lifted, eyes locked on Michelle with a fiery mix of anger and authority. Michelle, for her part, stayed rooted in the aisle, a subtle smile still lingering on her lips, though the sparkle in her eyes had sharpened into something far more dangerous. She raised one elegant hand, as if to calm the mob, the hall lights glinting off her wedding band, and with a voice that vibrated with quiet power, she said simply, "Hold on, y'all. I'm not here to cause trouble. But if we're talking about justice, don't I deserve 60 seconds to say my piece?" A fresh wave of shouting surged through the hall, and Jasmine knew in her bones that the next words she chose could either save her platform or surrender the entire room to Michelle's undeniable magnetism. And above it all, the cameras rolled on, capturing every flicker of emotion for an audience that would soon stretch far beyond the walls of this Dallas convention center. Michelle stood tall in the center aisle, one hand lifted in a gentle hush gesture that somehow managed to quiet the roaring crowd just enough for her words to slip through. She tilted her head slightly, flashing that signature smile that always seemed half mischief, half motherly wisdom, and spoke into the nearest microphone with the soft cadence of someone confiding a secret. "Look, y'all know I'm not trying to hijack the stage. I'm just asking for 60 seconds. 1 little minute. She paused, eyes twinkling as she leaned forward, voice dropping playfully. "That's more than I usually get at home with Barack talking my ear off." The audience burst into laughter, the tension briefly evaporating as several people doubled over, slapping their thighs or grabbing their neighbors in delighted shock. Even a pair of security guards near the stage traded faint grins, one whispering under his breath, "She's good, man. She's real good." Michelle, sensing the room softening, leaned into her own humor, letting the moment stretch just a beat longer. 60 seconds, she continued, holding up a single finger as if bargaining over produce at a farmer's market. "I promise I'll be quick, because Lord knows, my husband still hasn't forgiven me for the last time I took the mic and told the world he leaves his socks all over the floor." Peals of laughter rippled through the hall, phones held aloft, capturing her every expression, and the audience, once bristling with divided loyalties, now felt momentarily united by the universal truth of marital exasperation. A man near the front row, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Justice Now," wiped tears from his eyes and called out, "Michelle, take 2 minutes if you want," which drew another round of chuckles. But amid the laughter, Jasmine's face remained frozen, her eyes trained on Michelle with laser precision, her body rigid behind the podium as though bracing for an invisible storm. While the crowd tittered around her, Jasmine's mind raced through 1,000 silent calculations. She felt the blood pounding behind her temples, the edges of her vision sharp and bright under the stage lights. This wasn't just a spontaneous moment. It was a powder keg with her political future balanced precariously on top. Every instinct in Jasmine screamed that giving Michelle the floor, especially unplanned and unscripted, could shatter the event's focus on systemic injustice and transform it into a celebrity spectacle. Yet equally strong was the dread pooling in her chest at the idea of being seen as the woman who silenced Michelle Obama, a revered figure for millions and an icon whose very presence demanded reverence. A hush rippled through the audience as they sensed Jasmine's internal war playing out in the flicker of her eyes, the tight line of her mouth. For a split second, the crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, teetering on the brink of chaos or catharsis. Jasmine swallowed, fighting the dry tightness in her throat, hearing her own voice echoing back at her from every past courtroom battle. Control the room. Don't let emotion steal the narrative. But even as she summoned her resolve, Jasmine could feel the energy shifting, as if the very floor beneath her feet was tilting away. The crowd was no longer purely hers. The magnetic force of Michelle's charm was undeniable, drawing cheers and sympathetic nods, even from people who'd arrived wearing Jasmine's campaign buttons. Somewhere near the back, a woman called out, "Let her speak, Jasmine!" While moments later, another voice, lower and fierce, shouted, "This is your stage, Jasmine. Don't give it away." The chants began to rise and crash, like ocean waves against a rocky shore, folding over one another in a chaotic rhythm of support and defiance. Jasmine gripped the edges of the podium so tightly her knuckles whitened, her mind flashing with news headlines she could already imagine. Crockett silences Michelle. or worse, chaos erupts over black women's divide. She closed her eyes for a half second, gathering the tattered threads of her composure, then opened them to find Michelle still waiting, still smiling, but with an intensity beneath her gentle exterior that suggested she was willing to stand there all day until she got her minute. In that electric instant, Jasmine realized this was no longer just a question of speech time. It was a battle for narrative, for control, for the very soul of the conversation about justice in America. And as the shouting swelled again, Jasmine understood with chilling certainty that no matter what choice she made, the country would be talking about this moment for a long time to come. Jasmine, her jaw set but her eyes wary, finally gave a small nod, signaling the security guards to hold back. The two men in black suits hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing at each other as if waiting for permission to breathe, then slowly stepped aside, melting back toward the fringes of the stage. Michelle offered Jasmine a graceful dip of her chin, a gesture that was equal parts gratitude and silent acknowledgement of the power Jasmine still held in this space. She took a few measured steps closer to the stage, but stopped short of stepping up onto it, choosing instead to stand squarely in the aisle where the stage lights caught her face in a soft halo. The murmurs in the hall quieted to an almost reverent hush as 5,000 people leaned forward, hungry for whatever she was about to say. Michelle glanced around the cavernous room, then pressed one hand to her chest with theatrical solemnity. "Now, y'all know I wouldn't barge in here without a reason," she began, her voice warm and lightly teasing. "But when I heard all this talk about justice and fairness, I thought, well, shoot, this reminds me of the biggest fight we ever had back on Euclid Avenue." A ripple of laughter rose from the crowd, cautious at first, as though people were testing whether it was safe to laugh again. Michelle continued, her smile widening. "I'm talking about the Great Gumbo War of '89. See, in my neighborhood in Chicago, folks were deadly serious about their gumbo. One neighbor insisted you had to have shrimp. Another said shrimp was the devil, and you'd ruin the whole pot. Someone else tried to sneak in okra, and Lord help us, that's how we nearly had to call the police." The audience burst into open laughter, the kind that rolls through a crowd like a warm breeze, sweeping away leftover tension. Even Jasmine's lips twitched, though she quickly pressed them into a thin line, determined not to give away too much ground. Michelle leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice as if sharing a scandalous secret. "And you know how we settled it? We sat down at one long table, tasted every pot of gumbo, and argued for 6 hours straight. And then we all agreed my mama's was the best. Because that's how democracy works." The crowd erupted again, the laughter ringing off the high steel rafters of the convention center. Phones bobbed in the air, capturing Michelle mid-gesture as she mimed ladling soup, her gold bracelet catching the stage lights. A man in the second row shouted, "Tell him, Michelle!" And a woman nearby giggled so hard she accidentally dropped her phone, earning a burst of sympathetic chuckles from the rows around her. But just as the room seemed to settle into the warmth of shared humor, Michelle's expression shifted, the smile fading from her lips like a tide pulling away from shore. She straightened her shoulders, the laughter dying around her as if someone had hit a mute button. "Now listen," she said, her voice dropping into a tone low and earnest, each syllable crisp as glass. "It's easy to laugh, and it's easy to fight, but what's not easy is listening. Justice doesn't come from shouting louder. It doesn't come from who can hold the mic the longest. It comes from sitting down, sharing our stories, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, and hearing each other out." The hall fell utterly silent, every eye locked on Michelle as if she were delivering a verdict. The weight of her words seemed to press down on the air itself. In the third row, an older woman with silver hair clasped her hands to her chest, her lips trembling, while in the back, a young man slowly lowered his phone, forgetting for a moment to film. Michelle's eyes scanned the room, deep and searching, and though her voice was soft, it carried with unmistakable force. If we lose the ability to listen, if we keep trying to shout each other down, we're losing something bigger than a debate. We're losing America. For a beat, no one moved. Then, like a fuse catching flame, faint applause began to ripple through the audience, swelling into a rising wave. People clapped slowly at first, then more urgently, some nodding, others wiping at moist eyes. Even those who minutes earlier had shouted for Michelle to leave seemed caught in the gravity of her words. Jasmine, standing rigid behind the podium, felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that Michelle, with just a few sentences, had managed to tilt the entire emotional axis of the room. And somewhere deep in Jasmine's chest, beneath the layers of pride and politics, a quiet voice whispered a truth she was unwilling to admit out loud, that Michelle's minute was far from over, and the real fight had only just begun. For a few moments after Michelle's final words, the applause still echoed like distant thunder, tapering into a hush heavy enough to make even the stage lights feel too bright. Jasmine stood motionless behind her podium, her hands gripping the edges so firmly that the wood creaked under her fingers. She took a slow breath, her eyes darting across the sea of faces, now turned expectantly back toward her, waiting to see whether she'd crumble under the tidal wave of Michelle's eloquence. Then Jasmine lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with determination, and leaned into the microphone with a half-smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "Well, Mrs. Obama, that was quite the gumbo story," she began, pausing just long enough for a ripple of nervous laughter to bubble up from the audience. She tilted her head slightly, letting a spark of humor glint in her voice. "But I'm a lawyer, not a chef. And the only recipe I'm interested in is the one that finally serves justice to everybody who's been waiting too damn long." Laughter erupted through the crowd, more robust this time, shaking off the somber mood Michelle had cast. A woman near the front doubled over, slapping her friend's arm as if Jasmine had just delivered the punchline of a killer stand-up routine. Even some of the security guards cracked brief smiles, the tension in their shoulders easing for a fleeting instant. Jasmine pressed her advantage, letting her natural charisma pour into her voice. "I don't need shrimp, okra, or secret spices to know that there are people out there right now getting crushed under a system that's supposed to protect them. And I sure don't need a dinner table debate to see that this country has been cooking up injustice for way too long." The audience chuckled again, a rolling wave of amused murmurs spreading outward as Jasmine's sharp wit sliced through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. But as quickly as the humor sparked, Jasmine let it die, her face turning grave, her voice dropping into a low register that vibrated with raw emotion. "Here's the thing, y'all," she said, each word ringing out with the finality of a judge's gavel. "I've stood in courtrooms and watched mothers weep because their sons were locked away for things they didn't do. I've seen families ripped apart because they couldn't afford bail. I've held the hands of people who looked me in the eyes and said they'd rather die than spend one more day trapped in a cell built for profit." A hush fell over the hall as the weight of her words slammed into the audience like a cold front rolling through Texas heat. The playful smirks disappeared. Phones, once raised high, drifted downward as people suddenly remembered to breathe. Jasmine's voice cracked, just barely, as she pushed forward, refusing to blink against the emotion burning in her eyes. "We don't have time for polite conversations. Not when people are dying. Not when black and brown folks are losing years, sometimes their whole lives, to a system rigged against them from the start. We're not talking about recipes or stories around a dinner table. We're talking about blood. We're talking about graves that shouldn't exist. We're talking about kids who'll never come home." A woman in the third row covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, while a man beside her stared at the stage as though seeing Jasmine for the first time. The energy in the room shifted once again, from the hopeful glow Michelle had kindled to the harsh, undeniable glare of painful truth. Jasmine's gaze swept across the audience, searching each face, daring them to look away. "So, with all due respect, Mrs. Obama, I'm not here to make everybody feel comfortable. I'm here to tell the truth, and the truth is ugly, and it hurts. But until we're willing to face it, no amount of polite talk is going to save the people who are counting on us." A wave of silence rolled over the crowd, thick and suffocating. For several heartbeats, the convention center seemed to exist, outside of time, suspended between Michelle's call for unity and Jasmine's thunderous demand for urgency. And in that breathless stillness, Every person in the hall knew they were standing on the edge of a moment that might change them forever. A heavy silence lingered in the hall, pressing down on every seat like an invisible weight, until suddenly it was shattered by a voice booming from somewhere near the middle rows. "Well, hell, ladies, if y'all are done, can we get back to the gumbo taste test? I came hungry." The audience jerked as one toward the speaker, a wiry older man with a sun-leathered face and a battered cowboy hat that looked as though it had survived 3 rodeos in a small tornado. He slapped his thigh, grinning wide, his voice carrying a playful twang. "Or at least somebody pass me a plate, 'cause this here's the spiciest showdown I've ever seen." Laughter rippled through the hall, hesitant at first, then gathering strength as the absurdity of the moment crashed over the crowd like a welcome wave. Even Michelle let out a short, musical laugh, shaking her head as though to say, "Only in Texas," while Jasmine raised one eyebrow, the corners of her lips betraying the faintest hint of amusement. The man continued, undeterred, gesturing at the 2 women with a wide sweep of his hat. "Shoot, we all know neither one of y'all's gonna budge an inch, so how about we put it to a vote? Who's for the gumbo and who's for throwing down right now?" The room erupted into a chorus of laughter, some people applauding, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jasmine shot him a look that was half glare, half grin, and said dryly, "Sir, if I wanted a cook-off, I'd have called the Food Network." The man winked, tipping his hat. "Well, darling, y'all are serving enough heat for 'em already." More laughter rolled through the crowd, offering a brief reprieve from the storm of heavy truths swirling around them. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if humor might stitch the torn seams of the room back together. But the laughter was barely fading when a frail voice trembled up from the 3rd row, shattering the levity like a glass dropped on marble. An older woman, hair pinned in tight gray curls, stood slowly, gripping the back of her chair for balance. Her voice cracked as she began to speak. "My son, my baby boy, he's in jail for something he didn't do." The words dropped into the space like stones into deep water, sending ripples of stunned silence through the audience. The cowboy lowered his hat, his grin erased in an instant, while nearby a woman gasped softly and covered her mouth with her hands. The older woman's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she stared first at Jasmine, then at Michelle, as though willing them both to feel the weight of her pain. "He's been in there 3 years waiting for trial. 3 years. And nobody listens. Nobody believes us. Justice takes too long for people like us." The silence grew impossibly deep, as though the very walls of the convention center were holding their breath. A single sob escaped someone in the audience, sharp and unguarded. Jasmine's eyes shone with fierce sorrow, while Michelle blinked rapidly, pressing her lips together to keep from breaking. The older woman's shoulders shook as she lowered herself slowly back into her seat, and in that instant, the bright lights seemed cruel, illuminating a truth that humor couldn't soften and no gumbo story could sweeten. And in that charged quiet, the crowd sat frozen, torn between the need to laugh and the inescapable knowledge that laughter alone would not save them. Michelle lingered in the aisle, eyes fixed on the woman in the 3rd row, as though memorizing every line of her sorrow. The audience still held its collective breath, unwilling to shatter the fragile silence that hovered in the wake of the woman's trembling confession. Slowly, Michelle lifted the mic closer to her lips, and a gentle half-smile ghosted across her face, as though she were trying to lift the room back into the light. "Lord, y'all are gonna make me cry and mess up my mascara," she said, her voice a shaky blend of humor and tenderness. "You know, whenever Barack and I get into one of our discussions, okay, fine, arguments, he starts dragging chairs all over the living room, rearranging furniture like we're staging a White House photo shoot." The crowd let out a ragged burst of laughter, eager for the relief, and a ripple of chuckles rolled through the rows like wind rustling through leaves. Michelle gestured with her free hand, pantomiming Barack hefting a folding chair across the room, shoulders hunched, lips pursed in mock seriousness. "I'm just trying to talk, and he's over there playing interior decorator. Y'all pray for me." More laughter broke out, some people clapping, grateful for a moment to breathe. A young woman near the back wiped away tears of laughter and sadness, all tangled together. Jasmine, still at the podium, shook her head and murmured, just loud enough for the front row to hear, "This woman's gonna make me laugh myself right into a migraine." The crowd tittered again, the spell of sorrow cracking enough for a shared smile or two. For a few brief seconds, it seemed as though Michelle's familiar humor might once again knit the room together, bridging the cavern that had opened between raw pain and collective hope. But then Michelle's playful smile faded, replaced by a solemn stillness that seemed to pour from her eyes like a gathering storm. She drew a slow breath, lowered the mic slightly, then raised it again, as if each word carried the weight of granite. "But let me tell you all something. While we're laughing, and God knows we need to laugh, there's something else happening in this country. We're tearing each other apart, piece by piece. We're losing what makes America America." Her voice dropped into a register so soft and low that people leaned forward, straining to catch every syllable. Faces in the crowd grew solemn, the echoes of laughter evaporating like mist in the sun. Even the cowboy in his hat sat stone still, the brim casting a shadow over his eyes. Michelle scanned the audience, her gaze steady and unblinking, as though looking into each person's soul. We're forgetting how to disagree without hating each other. We're forgetting how to sit at the same table, even if we're yelling over gumbo. And remember that we're still family at the end of the day. A shiver passed through the hall, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees. In the back rows, murmurs rose as people exchanged worried glances, the tension tightening again like a rope wound too tight. Michelle closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, fierce and glistening. If we keep going like this, if we can't find a way to listen, even when it hurts, we're going to wake up one day and realize we've lost this country we all say we love. The silence that followed felt endless, hanging in the air as heavy as the scent of sweat and stage lights. And in that quiet, the weight of Michelle's warning settled over every person in the room, leaving them perched on the fragile edge between hope and despair, laughter and tears, unity and fracture. A fragile hush still hung over the hall, trembling like a tightrope strung between two skyscrapers, when suddenly a piercing squeal of feedback shrieked through the speakers, startling everyone like a slap across the face. The sound guy, skinny, ponytailed, wearing a t-shirt that said, "More treble, less trouble," frantically twisted knobs on his console, his brow glistening with sweat. His assistant, a lanky kid in cargo pants, waved his arms in silent panic as the background music accidentally blasted at full volume, flooding the convention hall with pounding pop beats that sounded absurdly cheerful in the midst of political warfare. Michelle jumped slightly, looking around as if trying to figure out whether she'd wandered into a dance party, while Jasmine blinked twice in utter disbelief, her lips parted in silent horror. The audience couldn't help themselves. Laughter broke out like a burst dam, some people clutching their stomachs as the pop song kept playing, an up-tempo track with lyrics cheerily chanting, "Shake it, shake it." Jasmine shot a glare toward the sound booth that could have curdled milk, snapping into her mic. "Y'all want to turn that off before we start a conga line?" The sound guy slapped buttons wildly, and the music cut off with an abrupt blip, leaving a weird echo hanging in the rafters. Michelle covered her mouth to stifle her giggles, eyes dancing with mischief. Somewhere in the audience, the cowboy from earlier bellowed, "I'll lead the conga if no one else will," drawing another fresh wave of laughter. Even reporters struggled to keep their cameras steady as they chuckled behind their gear. For a fleeting second, it felt like the entire hall was united again, brought together by the shared absurdity of political drama, colliding with technical chaos. But the hilarity was still echoing when phones began buzzing like angry bees in people's pockets. The laughter dwindled as dozens, then hundreds of audience members glanced down at glowing screens, frowning as notification banners popped up faster than they could swipe them away. A PBS reporter whispered urgently into his phone, his eyes widening. Near the stage, a woman gasped out loud, "Oh my God, it's already online!" Jasmine's eyes darted toward the nearest screen as one of her aides pushed through the crowd, tablet in hand, showing her a clip that was barely 60 seconds old but already blazing across social media platforms. It was Michelle, standing in the aisle, face lit like a prophet, saying, "If we lose the ability to listen, we're losing America." Almost simultaneously, news outlets blasted breaking headlines onto giant screens hanging above the crowd. Fox News: Michelle Obama hijacks judicial reform rally, crowd goes wild. CNN: showdown of black female leaders, rocks Dallas. TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, every feed lit up with fragments of the confrontation, hashtags multiplying by the second. Shari, Dallas showdown, Suryasar, Leatherspeak, Shiyas, Crockett, vs. Obama. People stared at their phones as if they'd just witnessed history. A woman in the front row murmured, voice barely above a whisper, This is going to be on the news for weeks." Jasmine's stomach dropped like a stone into deep water as she realized the truth. Whatever had just happened in that hall was no longer theirs to control. It now belonged to millions of strangers dissecting it from every angle. And somewhere in the chaos, she knew this moment might not just reshape the conversation on justice, it might reshape the entire narrative of who owned that conversation at all. The applause outside was still faintly echoing as Jasmine pushed through the heavy curtain and into the harsh, fluorescent glare of the backstage hallway. Her team was already gathered there, clustered around a folding table laden with half-empty coffee cups, spilled sugar packets, and an untouched box of pink frosted donuts that somehow looked wildly out of place amid the political carnage. Carla, still gripping her clipboard like a lifeline, was the first to break the silence. "Okay, I know this is chaos, but can we all just agree that Mrs. Obama basically hijacked the show? I mean, the woman's a legend, but damn." Another aide, a young man with glasses fogged from running back and forth, added between panting breaths, "Hijacked?" She straight up Grand Theft Auto'd the microphone. For a moment, the tension cracked, and a burst of laughter spilled from the team, a collective exhale that left them momentarily lightheaded. Jasmine let out a brittle laugh, rubbing her temples. "Lord, I'm going to be dreaming about gumbo and folding chairs for weeks." Carla snorted. "Don't worry, we'll send you to therapy before you start reciting gumbo recipes on the house floor." The group chuckled again, the humor rolling through the room like a wave, pushing back the exhaustion threatening to drag them under. Someone reached for a donut, hesitated, then said, "Screw it," and took a massive bite, pink frosting smearing across his cheek. Jasmine stared at him, eyes wide. "You have frosting on your face like a clown, and I need you to brief me on crisis comms in 30 seconds. The aide wiped his mouth hurriedly, mumbling, "Best damn donut I ever had." And for a precious handful of seconds, laughter filled the air instead of panic. But the laughter faded quickly, leaving only the hum of phone vibrations on the table as notifications kept flooding in. Jasmine sank into a folding chair, her posture suddenly sagging as she stared at the tablet Carla handed her. On the screen was a tidal wave of social media posts, hashtags multiplying, video snippets racking up hundreds of thousands of views in real time. Comments scrolled by too fast to read, but the fragments Jasmine managed to catch twisted a knife in her chest. Michelle stole the show. Crockett too aggressive. Finally, real talk from Michelle. Jasmine's not wrong, but wow, Michelle. Jasmine scrolled further, each swipe another blow. Even people who'd supported her minutes earlier seemed swept up in Michelle's narrative, gushing about how she'd brought grace and wisdom to the chaos. A silence settled over the team as Jasmine stared at the screen, her reflection pale and ghost-like in the glass. Doubt gnawed at her ribs like a rat in a locked room. She knew the fight for justice was never easy, but she hadn't expected to feel so utterly sidelined in a moment that was supposed to be hers. Slowly, she set the tablet down and looked up, her voice trembling but resolute. "They're all talking about Michelle," she murmured, "but people are dying out there. I'm not going to let one moment, no matter how viral, erase the truth we came here to tell." Carla reached across the table, placing a hand over Jasmine's. "Then let's make sure the next moment belongs to you." Jasmine closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering the tattered threads of her courage, then opened them again, her gaze hardening with steely determination. Because if there was one thing she knew deep in her bones, it was that the story wasn't over, and neither was she. Sunlight slanted through the big front windows of a coffee shop in downtown Dallas, painting golden streaks across the battered wooden tables and the swirl of steam rising from countless cups. The air buzzed with low conversation as customers crowded together, eyes glued to phones or tablets, replaying the same viral clips again and again. Jasmine's fierce declarations, Michelle's calm storytelling, the gumbo jokes, the arguments, the tears. It was all there in endless loops, dissected from every angle. At a table near the window, a middle-aged woman in a crisp white blouse leaned forward, waving her latte dramatically as if she were cross-examining a witness. I'm telling y'all, if Michelle and Jasmine started a podcast together, I'd subscribe tomorrow. I mean, they'd solve world peace before episode 5. Laughter exploded from the people around her, a joyful burst cutting through the weariness of too much politics and too many headlines. A man in a cowboy hat chimed in, grinning wide. I'd listen just for the gumbo recipes, darlin', and maybe to hear Jasmine roast half of Congress on air. At the next table, a group of college students were arguing in animated whispers, hands flying in all directions. Michelle was right. It's about dialogue, one insisted, slamming his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the sugar packets. His friend rolled her eyes, retorting, but Jasmine's right too. People are dying. We don't have time for polite talk. Another woman held up her phone, playing the clip where Michelle jokes about Barack moving chairs during arguments. I mean, come on. She's hilarious. The students dissolved into a new wave of laughter, echoing across the cafe. The barista behind the counter sighed dramatically. If they don't stop, I'm going to have to put up a sign. No politics after the third espresso. Yet beneath the humor, an unspoken tension pulsed in the room, like a heartbeat everyone felt, but no one wanted to mention. Faces sobered as screens replayed the older woman's trembling voice from the convention center. My son's in jail for something he didn't do. Silence sometimes fell mid-laughter, conversations stalling as people stared into their coffee, wrestling with the weight of questions that had no easy answers. Outside the shop, the streets of Dallas shimmered under a hot afternoon sun, but inside, the glow seemed muted, dulled by the realization that the fight wasn't over, and maybe never would be. As the video's narration resumes, the storyteller's voice grows softer, edged with a gravity that commands quiet. This story wasn't just about a microphone or a convention in Texas, or even two powerful women who dared to disagree in public. It was about something deeper, a country grappling with the cost of silence. Because justice must be pursued. But are we brave enough to listen, even to those we fiercely disagree with? Or will we keep shouting so loudly that we drown out the very truth we're trying to find? Soft piano notes begin to drift into the background, the music gentle and reflective, carrying a wistful echo that lingers like a question left hanging in the air. The barista wipes down the counter, glancing over at the people still debating, a thoughtful frown creasing his forehead as if he too is trying to decide which voice he believes and which truth he's willing to face. Outside the convention center, the summer sun blazed over Dallas, glinting off office windows and sizzling against car roofs in the sweltering heat. Life moved on, as it always does, though the echoes of that day still rippled through the city's conversations, news feeds, and quiet corners. In the days and weeks that followed, Jasmine Crockett didn't fade away. Instead, she threw herself deeper into the work that had brought her to that stage in the first place. She visited high school classrooms in South Dallas, her voice strong and passionate as she talked to students about knowing their rights and demanding fair treatment. She stood in cramped community centers, listening as mothers and fathers poured out stories of children caught in a broken legal system. And in every room, Jasmine's presence burned with fierce determination, a living reminder that justice demanded not just words, but relentless, unglamorous action. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama continued her speaking tour across the nation, stepping onto stages in packed auditoriums, churches, and union halls, her voice weaving humor and wisdom like a skilled storyteller. She urged people to hold tight to civility, to believe that conversations, however painful, were still worth having. From Chicago to Atlanta, crowds hung on her words as she spoke about unity, resilience, and the belief that even in a fractured nation, bridges could still be built if enough people were willing to listen. Cameras followed her everywhere, capturing moments where she hugged tearful audience members or cracked jokes that left entire rooms howling with laughter. And so, two women, each a force unto herself, kept moving forward. Their paths didn't always cross, yet their stories remained intertwined in the minds of millions who'd witnessed the Dallas showdown. For many, they were symbols of America's deep divide, but also of its deepest hope, that even those who clash can still share a common dream. As the narration closes, the storyteller's voice softens to a near whisper. Two women, one fight, but different visions of how to save America, and maybe, just maybe, in the space between them, lies the answer we're all searching for. The piano music fades into silence, leaving viewers staring at the screen, hearts caught between laughter and the ache of truths still waiting to be faced. The characters Michelle Obama and Jasmine Crockett in this story are fictionalized and do not represent real people in real life. This narrative is entirely a work of creative storytelling and is not intended to portray actual events, statements, or actions of any real individuals. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more powerful and engaging stories that shine a light on justice, truth, and the human spirit. Your support means the world.